This meeting of the Senate Appropriations Subcommittee on Interior, Environment, and Related Agencies. Chief, it's good to have you here before the committee today to discuss the President's FY26 budget request for the U.S. Forest Service. We appreciate you joining us. I was very pleased to have the opportunity to visit with you earlier about not only the important work that the Forest Service does around the country, but what it means to us in Alaska. But it is clearly an important role when we think about supporting our nation's timber and mineral industry, providing recreational opportunities to tens of millions of Americans, generating billions of dollars in economic output. So again, thank you for the chance to talk to you about many of these things, everything from wildfire to timber to recreation, workforce. It was good. It was a good conversation. The President's budget request proposes a drastic reorganization of our nation's wildfire capabilities, transfers the bulk of the wildfire personnel and activities from the Forest Service to a newly created U.S. Wildland Fire Service located within the Department of Interior. So this subcommittee has always paid a great deal of attention to wildfire preparedness and suppression. We do it on a very bipartisan basis. This is one of those things that we all come to the table to talk about. And yet, our forests continue to struggle. The costs keep escalating. And so I agree, the problem calls out for new ideas, for greater efficiency, but I'm concerned about the proposal that we have because it upends your agency and its relationship to fire and forest management. And for all I know, it may be a good thing. This may be exactly the right approach, but I'd like to hear from you today about how the administration envisions this whole restructuring working and really what it means to the Forest Service as an agency. At the same time that we're having this hearing, Secretary Burgum, Secretary of the Interior, is over at the Energy Committee in a full committee hearing, and these are the same kind of questions that he's getting. So I'm going to have a chance. I think both of us are going to be popping in and out of various committees here this morning, but that's one of the things that I want to ask the Secretary about. The President has also set out an ambitious agenda on natural resources development, including focusing on increased timber production and mineral development from our nation's forests. Now, I'm supportive of the endeavor. We want to be a partner in achieving many of these goals, but it's not you and I that are going to make that happen. It's going to be workforce capacity, and that's something that I continue to have concerns about. Turning to Alaska and resource development, I want to thank President Trump and you for recognizing Alaska's amazing natural resource potential. We've got our Alaska-specific executive order. There's other EOs nationally that we can benefit from, including the one on timber. You know, we've had this conversation. Alaska hosts two national forests. They just happen to be the largest in our country, and yet the Chugach doesn't even have an allowable sale quantity for timber. The Tongass's is so dismal, it probably ranks last in the nation. So whatever we can do to bolster our nation's timber production would be important to my home state. We've also got major mineral potential, but without some level of flexibility within the roadless rule, it's almost impossible to realize that. So we fight this view or this perspective that some have that our state is just some giant national park, some wilderness area that needs to be viewed from afar and not touched. So we want to work with you on some of these things. The Forest Service National Forest System also plays a very key role in recreation and tourism, of course. Record visitation levels to our public lands. We want to encourage that, but it's imperative that we not discount the economic impacts that this can have on the economies of our local rural communities. I think it's critical that the Forest Service assets like trails and public use cabins, visitors center, have the staffing that they need to do right by these public facilities. We've really got to have a better understanding of the role that the Tongass plays in all of this. Forest Service really holds the key to the entire region's economy. As I shared with you, this isn't part of the state where I was born. I spent my early years right up until high school living in the southeastern area. It is all, every community is in the Tongass National Forest. We're surrounded by our national forest. I was born in the Tongass National Forest. Just 1% of this part of the state's in private hands. National forests and everything from local tour guide permits, subsistence activities, issuance of and maintaining of utility right-of-ways, economic development, these are all contingent on us having a federal partner who's willing to work with the people and the industries who live and work in the region. A failure by the service to maintain routine business operations, whether through inadequate staffing or budget, I think is an abdication of responsibility, and it doesn't do anything except punish the communities and the citizens who live in or near our national forests and restrict their economic opportunities. I've shared the story with you of a Mendenhall Glacier. This is managed by our National Forest Service. It's one of our most popular tourist attractions in Southeast Alaska, receiving over 1 million visitors in 2023 and more than 25,000 visitors daily during the summer period. This is so critical to the city and borough of Juneau. We've got a great work relationship with the Tlingit and Haida tribes. They're at Mendenhall with a co-stewardship agreement with the Forest Service. That's really important. I was there just a few weeks ago out at the Visitors Center and talked with one of your great Forest Service employees, and I have to tell you, the morale is shot. People are trying to figure it out, and they're doing good work, and they're proud of the work that they're doing, but it is hard on them right now. I'm also concerned about other aspects of the budget proposal, the proposed elimination of the state, private, and local forestry, as well as forest rangeland research accounts. I get the fact that we've got to make some hard budgetary decisions as we're dealing with deficits. But I think that there are many members of this committee who feel strongly about some of the programs within those accounts. I for one, don't understand the cuts to state and volunteer fire capacity grants. This helps bolster the fire response in so many rural areas of the country. I think oftentimes the beneficiaries of these funds are the initial responders to fires that occur on federal land. So it seems to me that cuts like this actually run counter to the committee's continued push to increase our wildfire resilience and response. I'm also concerned the budget proposes to reduce the service's capacity to work cooperatively with states, tribes, and local governments on the issue of invasive species. And that's something, again, we talk a lot about on a bipartisan basis here, because invasive species don't recognize property boundaries. They don't care whether you're a red state or a blue state. We're seeing the threat of these invasive insects and pests threaten the health of our nation's forests and grasslands. I think the Forest Service has been a great partner to many of the states and our local communities that face these threats, and the elimination of these programs in the Forest Service proposed budget has left the same states and communities struggling to understand how they're going to be able to do this alone. I don't want to just be all about complaining. I'm noting the challenges that we have within the budget. I know you know it, and that's why I'm pleased that you are here with the Forest Service. I'm looking forward to just kind of having a shift in attitude about what's going on in Alaska. I want people back home to view the Forest Service as a willing partner, a partner with us in so many of these endeavors that are so important to our extraordinary public lands. I look forward to your comments here this morning and again, your continued partnership. And with that, I turn to my colleague from Oregon, the Ranking Member, Senator Merkley.
Well, thank you very much, Madam Chair, and thank you, Chief Schultz. Forest Service manages a lot of land, 193 million acres of national forest and grasslands, and we certainly have a lot of those forests in my home state. People say, well, how did you get so many forests? Well, this is where God planted the trees in my state of Oregon, and so we grew up hiking, camping, being in the forest every second we can, and so they're very near and dear to our heart. You have a responsibility to work with states and stakeholders to lead the research and develop the tools that improve the health of trees from the backcountry to the urban landscape, and to meet the challenges of invasive pests and new diseases, urban heat domes, and wildfires. Well, many of these challenges, they don't respect state boundaries. Sudden oak death, bark beetles, wildfires, they're not local problems, they're national, and we need a national strategy. Now, the Chief of the Forest Service is an appointed position, not a nomination, so it's not confirmed by the Senate, typically filled by a person who has served in the Forest Service and who understands the motto of the Forest Service, caring for the land and serving the people, which I believe you do. However, this administration is making it exceedingly difficult to achieve these worthy goals. There are folks in this administration who want the American people to believe that the lands are mismanaged, to cut personnel and funding so they will be mismanaged, and to sell them off to the highest bidder. That is hardly caring for the land and serving the people. That's more like serving the powerful and selling off the lands. That's certainly not the motto of the Forest Service. So here we have a budget submitted that proposes to decimate a dedicated workforce, to slash established environmental standards, protect profits of oil and gas companies instead of protecting habitats and watersheds. This budget cancels funds to develop techniques to neutralize invasive species that threaten our forests, cancels funds to help federal officials, states, and private landowners partner together across a patchwork of jurisdictions to improve forest health, cancels funds for removing decades-old, unused logging roads that harm salmon runs, degrade watersheds, and cause landslides, cancels funds for supporting collaboration between environmentalists and timber companies to ensure that logging and fuel projects meet all of a community's needs. These are just a few of the many program cancellations and deep cuts in this budget, and I'm certainly alarmed by the cuts to the wildfire programs. The administration has already frozen funds and threatened to impound funds for wildfire fuels reduction and community wildfire defense grants. This administration terminated probationary employees who held red cards, meaning that they had firefighting expertise. This administration forced voluntary separation on senior wildland fire staff, only to recognize they needed to try to scramble to hire some of them back with financial incentives just in time for fire season. I was briefed by federal, state, and local officials on the upcoming wildfire season in Oregon on May 30th, and the basic bottom line, this year is going to be hotter, and it's going to be drier than last year, if the forecast is right. And last year we had a record number of acres burn in my state. Those acres, the bad fires came earlier. We were fortunate, therefore, because we had folks come from other states to help us out. And then later in the season, we were able to send folks to help out in other states. But what happens if those fires are all happening all at once? And what happens if that longer, hotter, drier summer produces more fires than last year? Instead of investing more in wildfire prevention and firefighting, this budget slashes those investments. No funds for research on climate chaos to understand how to reduce wildfire risk. No funds to help volunteers and rural fire departments with training and equipment. Instead of slashing these programs, we should be investing in good science, investing in good neighbor cooperation, investing in good management of our forests and watersheds. To reach these goals, one of the most effective programs we have is the Collaborative Forest Landscape Restoration Program. It brings together public officials, environmental advocates, timber industry, local stakeholders to encourage effective forest management that reduces wildfire risks while delivering saw logs to the mill. Now, this particular program is an example of solving a problem. One problem was very hard to get stakeholders who had opposing views into the room to work together. And another problem is that timber sales were all ending up in the courts. Well, this program has brought people together across the stakeholder community to work together to work out what they refer to as prescriptions for the forest. The result has been more forest health and more saw logs to the mill. It's been a win-win, and your budget kills the program. A major solution to two significant problems, and your budget kills the program. It's bipartisan. Senator Risch, Senator Daines, Senator Crapo, all Republicans, Idaho and Montana, Senator Wyden, myself, Senator Bennett, Colorado and Oregon. Bipartisan, blue and red, working together to solve these problems, and your budget kills the program. That's disturbing, to say the least. What would we do if this budget actually became law, if we just implemented the way it is? It'd be massive damage to our forests. We have to do better. We have to continue important research. We have to continue meaningful collaboration with states and stakeholders. We have to have real investment in forest management. We have to have the right staff, the experienced staff who know what they're doing to deliver the right results. And everything I've done in life said, my success will be much better if I have a good team. When you fire the good team, as you have done with so many employees, you're really heading in the wrong direction. And the administration undermines the Land and Water Conservation Fund, the hallmark promise we made to future generations to save natural places. This budget seems designed not to augment the work of the Forest Service and its motto, but to undermine the work of the Forest Service. Let's get back to the vision of caring for the land and serving the people. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Senator Merkley, thank you. And we will now turn to Chief Schultz. Again, welcome to the committee. Please provide us your thoughts for the next 5 minutes. Know that your full written statement will be incorporated as part of the record.
Chair Murkowski, Ranking Member Merkley, and other members of the subcommittee, thank you for inviting me to testify today. Established in 1905, the Forest Service is the nation's foremost federal forestry organization. The Forest Service manages 154 national forests, 20 national grasslands, covering 193 million acres in 43 states and Puerto Rico. The Forest Service also works with communities, state, local, and tribal governments, forest industries, and private forest landowners managing for multiple uses. Big picture, America's forests provide timber, clean air and water, forage, and energy production. They support local economies through employment, trade, recreation, tourism, jobs, and livestock raising. Alongside our partners, the Forest Service will continue to conserve and sustainably manage the nation's forests and grasslands. Recent analysis shows that in fiscal year 23, the Forest Service programs contributed approximately 390,000 jobs and $45 billion in GDP. This includes recreational visitor use, hunting, fishing, energy and minerals development, forest products, and livestock grazing. I'm grateful to serve as the 21st Chief of the Forest Service. I recognize that I am the first chief who did not come from or work previously within the agency, but I hope you will see, as I do, that that's a strength. I have more than 27 years of land management experience, and I'm a lifelong user of public lands. Working for state agencies in Montana and Idaho has given me a perspective on the role of the states in managing public trust lands and how that differs from goals and objectives in managing federal lands. My experience in the private sector at Idaho Forest Group gave me a deep understanding of markets and the role that raw material availability, quality, and price play in being able to support a profitable forest products industry. The fiscal year 26 President's budget refocuses Forest Service efforts on active forest management, critical minerals permitting, recreation, and energy development. In addition, the budget request emphasizes efficient and effective fire management by consolidating the federal suppression response apparatus into the new U.S. Wildland Fire Service under the Department of Interior. The Forest Service was founded on and understands the utility of our national forests. The production of timber, lumber, paper, bioenergy, and other wood products is vital for our country's well-being. The President's executive order on the expansion of timber production emphasizes the importance of timber production and how forest management can support American lives and communities. The fiscal year 26 budget request supports this executive order by maintaining our ability to support the forest products industry and shifting the forest inventory and analysis program to the National Forest System. This shift will better align the practical data needs for both public and private forest management. Our public lands offer some of the best recreational opportunities in the world, and many are on Forest Service lands. Recreational access is a cornerstone of our public lands, and I want to increase opportunities for people and communities to benefit from them. However, the federal government and the Forest Service cannot support this alone. We need additional support from partners and our communities to fund this ever-increasing use of public lands. This is an all-hands opportunity that must be supported to ensure continued availability of the lands. We have 82,000 volunteers that support the Forest Service in clearing trails and maintaining recreation sites. Livestock grazing on federal lands is integral to ranchers across the United States, especially in the West. Grazing is permitted on nearly 40% of the 193 million acres of National Forest System lands across 27 states. We administer permits for approximately 5,500 permittees with 1.3 million acres authorized for cattle and 800,000 AUMs for sheep. Access to critical minerals is essential to contribute to a stable supply of energy for current and future generations while continuing to sustain long-term ecosystem health and productivity. National forests are a bountiful resource for minerals. We work hard along with the BLM to manage leasable minerals from the National Forest System. We carry a fiduciary responsibility to the American public. We must steward tax dollars wisely, so we are examining how to best optimize our workforce and our expenditures to ensure that we are focused on field-based operations that are essential for meeting our high-priority objectives. To this point, the 26 budget request reduces or eliminates some aspects of the federal funding from the Forest Service budget to ensure stewardship of American taxpayer dollars and to better balance the appropriate roles of federal and state governments. It is not our intention to degrade the services of states and local governments, but we must change the reliance on the federal government to fund or deliver these services. In alignment with restoring federalism, we encourage increasing state authority to fund management of state and privately owned forests, community preparedness, and public risk mitigation activities. Communities across the country depend on national forests and grasslands, and I will work tirelessly to support those communities by partnering to actively manage the National Forest System for multiple uses. We maintain our commitment to strengthening relationships with the industries, the ranching families, the mining industry, communities, and conservation groups to deliver on our multiple-use mission as we have for the last 100 years. Thank you for inviting me to be here today, and thank you for your ongoing support, and I'll be glad to answer your questions.
Thank you, Chief. Let me begin. You've noted that you are the first chief who hasn't kind of come up through the ranks, but I would agree with you. Your observation that there can be great value with that. I think you have an awareness of what some may describe as a finicky relationship between the Forest Service and many of the states. In some areas of the country, Forest Service is a great partner. Others, they're viewed as this absentee landlord that's just kind of a pain. You've taken it upon yourself to visit many of our national forests, to meet the people, to look at the forests themselves, but to really gain a better understanding of the state of the agency that you're charged with leading right now. So I mentioned in my opening that some of the folks that I'm coming in contact with are concerned. They're telling me morale is down. They're worried about how they're going to be able to provide for that not only continued public service when it's something like the Mendenhall Visitor Center, or just making sure that we have trails that are maintained so that that visitor experience is there, or as I'm talking with folks in the timber industry saying, you know, are we really going to see anything different coming forward with this administration? So this is a pretty broad question, but can you give me your sense as to how the Forest Service is viewed overall right now, and if there's any common themes that you're picking up on that you're saying, all right, this has got to be my job number one coming into this position?
Thank you, Madam Chair. So job number one for me is to lead the agency. There's a lot of competing objectives, a lot of demands from the public, whether it's timber, whether it's minerals, whether it's recreation.
That's because we're multiple use. If
That's
it was
right.
just timber, it would be an easy job,
That's
but
right.
it's not.
absolutely. My job in leading the agency, though, is to be connected with both the agency and the decision makers, right? So that's where I have focused, and I've been out to regions 2, 3, 4, 5, and 8. So I've been in this role about 13 weeks, and I've been out, every other week I go out to the field to visit with people. So your question about morale, it varies. And what I find is that in many cases, the more information people have, the better they feel, right? So there's been an increase in information flow from myself and others. And as we've provided additional information, we've seen morale has increased, but it's not perfect. I mean, for sure it's not. We have patches where I think the more information people have, the better they feel. And I can tell you in the districts that I've visited, where we have employee engagements, typically the feedback post those engagements is positive. But I have not been, we have, 154 forests. And I've probably been on, in the last, 3 months, maybe I've been on 14 or, 12 to 14 forests. So it's a slow process to get out and meet with people, but I can tell you the more of those engagements that are direct, and I can share my thoughts and ideas with people, things are improving and people see there is some hope in terms of what the future looks like. I think some people are excited in terms of where we can go and how we can better deliver service to the public, and how we can align and do things differently. I mean, that's a big focus right now. A lot of the reductions that have been discussed in the Forest Service and how we're looking to restructure, and this was initiated, over a year ago. That was initiated because of some of the hole that we had in our budget. We had about a $750 million hole based on some decisions that were made on hiring. We hired a bunch of permanent employees with one-time money. So the Forest Service has known for quite some time that there was some reckoning that was coming in terms of a restructuring effort. So regardless of broader issues across government, the Forest Service has a necessity to restructure the agency to better align with the budgets that we do have, even current budgets, let alone the 26 budget.
So let me ask on that, and you've given me your commitment in private, but I'm just going to ask you to reaffirm it here. You've said you've been out to multiple regions. We need your commitment that you're going to be coming north to visit both of Alaska's key national forests.
Yes, ma'am, this summer.
Very good. We'll welcome you there. And so then when you're talking about budgets and realignments and I've mentioned some of the reductions in force and what we've seen. We've got a very strong executive order that I referenced in my opening comments to be told by an administration that they want to unleash one state's resource opportunity. We're excited about that, but we also understand that, again, in order to do so, it requires people to execute that. So can you give me the assurance that what we're seeing with the workforce reduction initiatives that are underway in the Forest Service are not going to delay or impede or obstruct the implementation of the President's executive order?
Madam Chair, what I can tell you is I can't guarantee there won't ever be any impacts, but I can tell you if we do have impacts, we will correct those as we learn information. We have a focus on maintaining all of our rec sites and our administrative sites, keeping them open to the public. It may not be 100% of the time, but if we have some reduced hours, but we are currently laddering people around the agency to make sure we fill critical vacancies. So to your point, we have had some people in the field at a district, at a forest level leave, and we've identified those critical vacancies to fill, and we're actually moving people around to fill those critical positions. So where we do have impacts, which there are impacts when people leave, we're trying to fill those as quickly as we can. So we're doing that on an ongoing basis right now.
Well, and I appreciate that, but I also recognize that all employees within the Forest Service are not necessarily fungible. In other words, if you are losing an individual in the Mendenhall area who is trained in dealing with bear avoidance with the public that's coming in off of the buses, and I take somebody from a headquarter in, I don't know, I'm making up a town, Indianapolis, and put them out there, I don't want that situation. And I'm hoping that, again, we're looking at this and recognizing that it's not just moving bodies, but it's ensuring that we have that level of expertise. Let me turn to Senator Heinrich.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I'm glad to hear, Chief, that you're going to be visiting several forests in Alaska this summer. I want to ask a similar question, but start from the point of view of, the Santa Fe National Forest manages the vast majority of the headwaters of the Pecos watershed, which is one of the most important watersheds in the state of New Mexico. And for decades, this is a community that has really worked very hard with very few resources to try to recover from historic pollution and protect that resource from future pollution. This is a river that supports traditional farming, recreation, fishing, fisheries, and many other uses that are economically critical to that community. But we still have legacy pollution from a pretty disastrous mine spill some 30 years ago. And I know I communicated with you recently. I sent you a letter inviting you to visit this community and meet with my constituents. Is that something that you can commit to doing?
Senator, thank you for the question. So my staff is looking at that request, and we're trying to figure out if we can make that work. So that's something we're actively working on right now.
I hope you can make that a priority. I think it's really helpful to get that community perspective. And there are vast differences between communities that call our national forest home, gateway communities in our different states. And so I would very much welcome you to join us in New Mexico for that. And I will make any logistics that you need help with a priority. I'm all for making government more efficient, but one of the things I'm concerned about is that there are some things that DOJ seems to be making less efficient, and one of those has been contract approvals, and that seems to be having real consequences in the service. Trash piling up at recreation sites, bathroom challenges, equipment not getting replaced in a timely way. I sent you and Secretary Rollins a letter on this yesterday, but can you give me a sense, why is it taking so long to get simple things like a contract extension for custodial services authorized?
So, Madam Chair, Senator Heinrich, so what I will tell you is initially when we first started looking at some of the existing contracts that we had for prior obligations, there was a process we had to get in place. And I think we've worked through all of the existing obligations. There should not be anything that's hung up there. When it comes to new obligations, we as the Forest Service instituted our own policies and procedures in addition to review from the department and from the efficiency folks. So we have put a process in place to make sure that it's thorough and responsive. When it comes to certain things like toilets and cleaning up toilets, which has been a huge issue that I've weighed in on in numerous cases, we have figured out that process. And some of that is on the Forest Service for the process that we put in place has kind of slowed some things down. But it's something that we have addressed, and there should not be toilets that are not being cleaned at this point in time. So if you're hearing about that, please let me know, because we've really jumped on this issue. In contracting in general, I think there is a review in place for contracts, grants, and agreements. It's not just contracts, it's all three of those. And that's something we are looking at, how we make that process more efficient. But there is a very thorough review. You're absolutely right. And is it different than it has been historically? Yes, it is, because there's more attention to detail in those contracts. But we're looking to make that process more effective and more timely than it has been over the last month. But it is something that we have a new process we just instituted about a month ago, and we're working on making that better.
I understand the need for analysis and review. I just want to make sure that we're not, adding layers of bureaucracy in the name of efficiency. The Southwest Ecological Restoration Institutes in New Mexico, Colorado, and Arizona, these are institutes that offer unique opportunities for dedicated research in forest science and watershed health. They represent the future of science for our forest management. Yet this plan cuts the Institute's budget by more than 50%, and that's just not a number that they can swallow in a single year. Why did you decide to reduce the funding for the institutes this year, and what is your plan for them in fiscal year 26?
Okay, so I think first of all, the fiscal year 25 budget is what your question is, I think, on the first one. So we did cut $3 million in fiscal year 25. So for the SWRI budget, they currently have $23 million on hand in prior appropriation dollars. So that was part of the consideration. So we're trying to align the 25 budget as we move toward the 26 President's budget. So we're moving in that direction. So the why is we're trying to align this year's 25 budget with where we're going in 26. In 26, it does not include resources to provide funding for SWRI. So there are resources this year, they are reduced, but next year in the 26 budget, there are none. That's correct. And that's tied to R&D's overall look. And the reason that R&D is treated differently in the 26 budget, there's going to be a greater reliance on the states and the universities. So a lot of the land-grant universities, and I was a member of the advisory board at the University of
That institute is at Highlands University.
Yes, sir. No, I understand. Yes, sir. My point is, though, that the funding in the future is going to have to come more from those universities themselves and other grant opportunities. The Forest Service is going to be shifting its funding away from R&D in general in the budget.
I think that's a mistake, and I think these institutes have really provided the Forest Service an enormous amount of science at a time when management has needed to change because conditions have been changing. And so I hope that as we approach the appropriations process, that we consider this president's budget as it should be considered advisory.
Thank you, Senator Henry. Senator Rounds.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Chief Schultz, it's good to see you here today. In recent years, timber sales in the Black Hills National Forest have steadily declined, placing significant strain on timber product manufacturers. The U.S. Forest Service has been unable to justify these harvesting shortfalls in the Black Hills, and as a result, local timber businesses have been forced to absorb additional shipping costs to source timber from more distant locations. To address this issue, I've introduced the Timber Harvesting Restoration Act, which would require superintendents of National Forest System units to submit harvesting improvement reports to the U.S. Secretary of Agriculture if they have consistently fallen well below the annual allowable sale quantity outlined in their forest plans. Sawmills in the Black Hills have borne the brunt of these shortfalls. In response to the reduced timber supply, some producers have been forced to scale back operations or close sawmills altogether. My question today, sir, is I've been encouraged by the administration's plans to increase the speed and scale of timber production on federally managed lands. Can you highlight any specific actions or plans the Forest Service has to improve the situation in the Black Hills National Forest?
Thank you, Senator. Yeah, so this has been a high priority. I've been familiar with the Black Hills issues for years, and I've actually been involved with shutting down a sawmill that was tied to lack of available saw timber, so I understand the issues firsthand. In particular, at the Black Hills, there was a meeting probably 6 weeks ago with industry, with conservation entities, with the Forest Service to develop a plan, a short-term plan and a long-term plan. And my understanding is that within the next 2 weeks, that short-term plan should be coming forward that will lay out a strategy for the next 12 months, what that plan is going to look like. And then beyond that, there's a longer-term plan being developed looking at the opportunity for stewardship contracts, good neighbor agreement contracts. We've also detailed a person from a forest in Region 6 to the Black Hills to assist. That's been very effective and assist the timber staff there. So it's something that is front and center for us. I'm familiar with the issues. I know the industry players as well as the entities that are working to help us.
Thank you for that. Let me talk about accountability a little bit. Are you planning on, in your new plan, to have accountability measures that the Forest Service would be able to use to review whether or not the regional staff are effectively following through on the timber harvesting improvement plans that would be put in place?
Yes, sir, we are.
Okay. In response to the executive order titled Immediate Expansion of American Timber Production, the Forest Service has proposed a national timber strategy aimed at increasing domestic timber production by 25% over the next 5 years. Unfortunately, under the strategy, Region 2, which includes South Dakota, is projected to increase timber production by only 2%. How are those regional percentages determined, and how will the strategy address the immediate need of the timber industry in the Black Hills, where timber availability put up for harvest by the Forest Service has declined drastically over the last 5 years? outside of what the forest plan was in the first place?
Senator, that initial analysis was based on having $200 million available to allocate across the country. And what they did was they looked at from 2020 through 2024 in terms of outputs. So they used that as a guide to allocate $200 million across the national forest system. So they're trying to allocate funding where there's a greater likelihood of outputs. So that's not a drawn in the sand line. That's based on those additional dollars being brought to the table. So we have an existing program that already exists today that $200 million is in addition to our existing funding. So we're exploring other options. We're exploring options working with the state of Wyoming under a broader good neighbor agreement where they would actually manage some of the national forest system lands in partnership with the Forest Service. We're looking at a long-term stewardship agreement that could be administered and provide less cost to the Forest Service. So those numbers right there, that's additional outputs tied only to a preliminary thought on allocation of funds. It's not a constraint. It's saying that if we had this $200 million and we allocate it like this based on our current cost structure, that's what that additional output would look like. But that's not drawn in the sand.
Okay, thank you. And one last question. Chief Schultz, concerned landowners in western South Dakota have contacted my office regarding minor fence line disputes between producers and federal officials. My understanding is that such disagreements are relatively common in areas with a high concentration of Forest Service land. I believe landowners deserve a fair notice and a review process when disputes with the federal government arise. How do you plan to address these concerns and make sure that landowners are treated fairly in such cases?
Senator, I appreciate the question. So a couple things. One, when we're aware of specific issues, we will address those specific issues. But I've also reached out to some of the trade associations that work with the ranching community to better understand what some of their priorities are. And we're working with them to understand how we can, from a policy perspective, approach things more from a communication across the country. And then when there's specific issues, we'll deal with those on a case-by-case basis.
Okay, not necessarily turning it into a criminal action.
Yes, sir.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your questions, Senator Rounds. And I'm going to turn to some, the first question is we submitted to you in advance so we could get a crisp answer because many people have been very concerned about the teams that we have ready to fight in the upcoming forest fire season. How many permanent firefighters do we have on board today and how many seasonal firefighters do we have on board?
So in terms of, Senator, in terms of the firefighters we've hired to date, we have just under 11,000 that we've brought on board. And those are GS9 and below, so that's our primary firefighting force. Our goal is to have about 11,300 at full capacity. So we're actually a little bit ahead of where we were last year at this time in terms of our overall hiring of our firefighting force.
It was pointed out to me back in Oregon that a lot of the folks who have signed up for the firefighter season are actually also accepting positions in other places because they're applying multiple places and getting multiple acceptances. Are we pretty confident that those 11,000 are going to show up?
Senator, yes, we are confident.
Okay. And the other concern has been not just the front line, but also the management teams, the complex incident management teams. How many teams do we believe we're going to be able to deploy, and how does that compare to a year ago?
So currently we have 37 teams nationally, and those are not all Forest Service teams. About 50% of the personnel in those teams are staffed by Forest Service personnel. There's also Department of Interior personnel. There's also states and that also support those teams. So we have 37 today, and approximately a year ago we probably had closer to 42 teams.
And are you working to get to that 42 number, or?
Yes, sir. I think that the team discussion is a broader discussion. There's been a decline in team participation for years. And I think part of it is just a lot of people do that as an additional duty. It's not a primary responsibility. So I think there's opportunities to talk about on an ongoing basis how we better structure teams, and does that become a more permanent role, or do we continue to do it with volunteers? Because right now team participation is largely based on volunteers.
Yeah. What we had heard back home was that we lost a lot of folks who participate in these teams due to the firings and the early retirements that were offered. And is that a piece of why we're at 37 instead of 42?
Senator, so keep in mind, like 50% of the personnel are just Forest Service. There's other personnel that are also contributing. I don't know the extent that that's had the impact, but what I can tell you is we've had about 1,400 people take DRP that had fire quals. We recently reached out to ask them if they had an interest in coming back, and we just opened that up about a week ago. The Secretary has been very clear that she wants them to come back if they have an interest, and we are going to work through that process. So the numbers are still in flux. We'll know more over the next week to 2 weeks.
Thank you. I'm going to turn to a chart that I've had the team prepare. And this chart is really all about state, private, and tribal forestry grants. And the chart suggests a number of questions. And can you move it over so it's right behind me? So what we're seeing here is that we had a continuing resolution for FY25, but all of the items that are in red have been dramatically reduced in the numbers you submitted to us. They've been cut in half. And that amount of money, $43.25 million, has been moved down to program salaries. Now, these are formula grants, by and large, with one exception. That's the landscape scale restoration. The rest are formulas. They're very easy to distribute. Of these three that are formula that have not been reduced, have those funds been provided to the states?
Senator, they're in the process of being provided to the states. I don't think they've been fully provided to the states yet.
So they have not been, I can assure you, because we're hearing from all the states saying, hey, we need these grants. Where are they in order to keep the rhythm of our programs alive? But can you commit to me today that those funds for those programs, those three programs, will go out?
Yes, sir. Our intention is to have all three of those grants go out here shortly.
Thank you. And then the ones that are in red that have been cut in half, why have they been cut in half?
Senator, so as you look at the 26 budget, I alluded to this earlier with the SWERI discussion, we're moving toward a budget that's not have funding for those. So we shifted that funding to salaries and expenses. We've had DRP. We have to pay for the DRP costs. So when people leave, there's that accrued leave that has to be paid out. So those funds are being shifted to pay for the DRP costs.
Can you explain to the public what a DRP is?
So that's the deferred resignation program. That's where people voluntarily leave the agency, and it's kind of like a severance package.
So the picture this is painting is $43 million is being shifted, $43.25 million is being shifted out of state grants. It's being shifted into program salaries because the plan, as you have laid out for FY26, is to shut down all of these programs.
Yes, sir.
Okay. I can tell you vast disagreement with this strategy. First of all, I think it's a violation of the trust between Congress and the Forest Service because Congress laid out a vision, a continuing resolution, and you're not continuing the programs, you're cutting them in half. And you're doing it in shifting funds, saying, we know what's going to happen in FY26, we're going to shut down these programs. Well, the executive branch is about executing the programs, and I don't anticipate that Congress is going to shut down those programs. So isn't it kind of a betrayal of the relationship to be cutting programs in half in preparation for shutting them down completely when the vision has not been laid out by Congress to do so?
Senator, I think what we recognize is that in terms of the specific language in our appropriation, there is some flexibility in how we do this, and we do know that we have a need to cover the cost of the DRP payments. So we can't go into a deficit spending model, so we thought that was the most prudent way to go about doing this.
So I'm over my time, so I'm going to defer to Senator Murray, but I'll just note the idea of shifting from real work on the ground to paying personnel expenses and doing a lot less work on the ground is absolutely not in concert with the vision laid out by Congress in the bill. Senator Murray.
Thank you very much, Senator Merkley, and I agree with you 100%. Thank you for outlining that. Let me go to this. As everyone knows, we're approaching wildfire season. In my home state of Washington, wildfires are a constant threat, as you well know. And when we invest in fire prevention, we save lives, we save entire communities. One of the most important investments we make is in the people who do that work. But President Trump is throwing all of that work into jeopardy right now. He's pushed out nearly 7,500 skilled employees across the Forest Service, either by firing them outright or pressuring them to leave under threat of losing their job later down the line. That includes at least 500 Forest Service employees in the Pacific Northwest, but we hardly know the full scope of the damage because the administration won't share critical information with us. I have spoken with countless Forest Service workers from Washington State who loved their job. They played an important role in fighting those fires and are gone now, thanks to Trump. Setting aside the proposal for a consolidated firefighting agency, this budget proposes a $1.4 billion cut, that is 40%, to the Forest Service non-fire programs at a time when our nation's trees from our backyards to backcountry are under stress, and we need to step up the pace of forest health and resiliency to withstand these catastrophic wildfires. On top of all that, the Forest Service has illegally withheld federal funds to help reduce wildfire risk and is currently not distributing $97 million to support state, rural, and volunteer fire departments. That is a huge threat to our communities I represent in Washington State who have told me personally this administration is putting them in danger by gutting our ability to respond to wildfires. So, Chief Schultz, I do appreciate your service to our country. I realize you are not making all the decisions here, but I have a number of important questions today, and I hope you can provide this committee with the information that we do need. Now, as I mentioned, I am profoundly concerned about this administration's reckless decision to mass fire and push out essential Forest Service employees across the country. The administration claimed that no firefighters have been fired, but the reality is on the ground we have lost workers whose jobs are absolutely essential. Nearly every single Forest Service worker supports fire operations in some capacity. Trail maintenance crews, for instance, ensure access to routes remain clear for firefighting personnel and equipment. Biologists conduct essential environmental assessments that inform prescribed burns and fuel reduction strategies. Other support staff, ecologists, engineers, maintenance workers, camp managers receive firefighter training, and they are actually mobilized during peak fire season to bolster our frontline firefighting crews. So, Chief Schultz, was there any formal analysis conducted to determine the potential effect of the mass firings for wildfire preparedness?
Senator Murray, thank you for the question. So I'll try to just clarify a few things. So in terms of a mass firing, we did not have a mass firing.
I'm talking about across the board, pushing people out, early retirement,
Right, so
doing all the things.
Right, I just want to clarify. So we did have 2 rounds of that deferred resignation program, and that was about 4,200 people that left voluntarily. And then we had another...
Because they didn't know what was coming.
They didn't know what was coming. I don't disagree with you. And we had another 600 that took voluntary early retirement. So there was no, in terms of, there were incentives for people to leave. Now, in terms of, we did not know who was going to leave. Obviously, it was a voluntary process. So what we've done is, when they did leave, we've been moving people to, we call that lateral movement, and we've been doing that across the agency, and we've moved probably close to 600 or 700 people to fill those critical vacancies. When it comes to the fire piece specifically, we had, I think I mentioned earlier, about 1,400 people that had fire quals that did leave. And we have reached out to those folks to secure their services this fire season to see if they want to come back on a voluntary basis to function on their team.
It just seems really ridiculous that it was done this way, which was my question, actually. Was there an analysis done before this was all done to realize the impacts of these people that you're now trying to find and bring back?
Senator, so we couldn't do the analysis because we didn't know who was going to leave because it was voluntary, right?
Well,
We didn't go handpick who
Well,
was going to leave.
I want to get on, but I
Right.
just said the stakes are life and death here, and this is really raises serious alarms about this agency being ready for this critical fire season. Now, let me move on. Interior Secretary Burgum recently told this committee that on-the-ground wildfire operations would not be affected by the administration's staffing cuts across various agents. But we know that's not true. In the Mount Baker Snoqualmie National Forest, one firefighter barracks recently and abruptly lost power. and it stayed without power, not for a few hours or a day, but for weeks. Why? Because the maintenance workers in that forest had been pushed out the door. There was no ability to put even a small purchase on a credit card because the card limit was drastically decreased. And there was no one left to process a basic contract to get that repair done. This is what happens when administrative staff disappear. It's not just an inconvenience. It directly affects whether firefighters have a safe place to sleep, whether they have power, whether they can be deployed effectively. Maybe Elon didn't care about the maintenance crew, but turns out they are pretty important. And this is not an isolated incident. I have heard so many stories. Administrative staff responsible for coordinating travel for crews when a fire breaks out, gone. People who made sure fire response teams had their fuel and supplies ready, they're gone. And all of this is happening as we now head straight into what is going to be a dangerous fire season in Washington State. So Chief Schultz, tell us, do you believe the Forest Service is ready for wildfire season, given this absence of critical administrative and support staff? Do you believe they are ready?
Senator, thank you for the question. Yes, I do believe they're ready. And then some of the credit card issues you're talking about, we have adjusted those. We've had increases in cards. And we've been moving people into lateral positions to ensure critical vacancies that we're clear that we can fill those.
Well, I can just tell you from on the ground, it feels like we are not prepared for this wildfire season. You just said we were. We will see what happens, but I fear I'm going to be right. Do I have time for one additional question? Thank you. Now, the president supposedly wants to increase timber output from federal lands by 25%. But here's the problem. This same administration is simultaneously cutting budgets, delaying funding, freezing hiring, and reducing staff at the Forest Service, the very agency that is responsible for that work. So how exactly is that going to work? Who's going to consult with the tribes? Who's going to lay out the sale plans? Who's going to mark the timber? Who's going to manage compliance and issue contracts when field offices have been literally decimated? Is the expectation, Chief Schultz, is it really the expectation that these fewer people with fewer resources, less support, can somehow deliver work at a faster pace and with greater complexity? How is that realistic?
Senator, thank you for the question. So I think it's an iterative process. We don't have all the answers today, but in terms of how we're going to get there, we're going to, again, fill critical vacancies. We're also going to have to lean on partners differently. So the states, in Washington, they have a very aggressive good neighbor program. So
Yeah, the states are being relied on for just about virtually everything. And I got to tell you, firefighters don't sit, as my partner from Oregon knows, they do not sit in one state.
That's right. But to your point, though, we are going to be working with partners in a different way. We're going to have different kind of contracting terms that we're going to have, looking at longer-term contracts.
Well, that begs the question. So do you have some kind of plan for this that's going to be executed over the next year? Because the wildfire season is here right now and critical employees are not in place.
So when it comes to the wildfire season, yes, ma'am, we do have the critical folks in place. When it comes to administering the timber program that you're talking about, we're building that right now. So that's part of what we're doing, is we're building that process, those interim operating plans. We're working on that right now. Yes, ma'am.
When will we see that?
I would suspect in the next couple months we'll have that whole plan figured out, how we're going to execute that for the next 4 years. That's what we're working on right now.
Okay, thank you very much.
Senator Van Hollen.
Thank you, Madam Chairman, and welcome, Mr. Schultz. I know you've got lots of experience in forestry and natural resource management in some of the western states like Idaho and Montana. And my colleagues here on the dais all have large national forests in their states, but forest management looks a little different coming from a state like mine of Maryland. And so I'm going to spend a little time just describing how we do benefit from what you do at the Forest Service. So in Maryland, the forest industry is our fourth largest industry in the state. It's actually larger than the seafood industry. That surprises a lot of people. I hope you've had a chance to have some of our great Maryland crabs and Old Bay. Our forest industry contributes about $3.5 billion to the local economy. That's about 5,000 jobs involved. So compared to Idaho, where 40% of the state's land mass is federally owned national forest land, Maryland is almost 40% forested, with 3/4 of those forested lands under private ownership. And the amount of privately owned forest land in the state means that forest management needs are different, and it means that the Forest Service has been a key partner in supporting those private landowners in the state of Maryland. As Joe Hinson, who's the board president of the Maryland Forest Association, said, and I quote, "Private lands and their management are absolutely crucial to the forest industry in Maryland. Technical assistance to these landowners from the Forest Service's state and private forestry budget is passed through the Maryland Forest Service, allowing DNR, Department of Natural Resources, foresters to work with private landowners to help them understand their options and make wise decisions for the management of their forest lands." Mr. Schultz, this has been very important to our small forestry businesses that support our economy. The next generation of landowners needs to remain confident that markets for forest products will exist in the future for financial return to justify their management costs today. That's where wood product innovation comes in. In Western Maryland, a company called Invent Wood is in the process of setting up a factory that will mass produce wood that's stronger than steel. This company was founded on research conducted at the University of Maryland with funding from the Forest Service. The Forest Service Wood Innovations Program and related research supports projects like Invent Wood and advances the onshoring of the next generation Made in America building materials, which is critical to the supply chain here in Maryland and across the country. I should say we've also seen benefits from the urban forestry initiatives in cities like Baltimore. A great example is the Still Meadow Peace Park in West Baltimore. Through the Forest Service's urban forestry program, the Still Meadow Community Fellowship, which is a local faith-based community, was able to restore 10 acres of urban forest land and create a workforce development program to train Baltimore youth to enter the forestry industry and creating important opportunities as well as environmental benefits. And finally, forestry is key to our decades-long effort to protect the Chesapeake Bay, a national treasure and an important economic engine for our region. In 1988, this has been decades in practice and implementation, an MOU was signed between the U.S. EPA and the U.S. Forest Service, committing the Forest Service through its state and private forestry program to support Chesapeake Bay's restoration efforts. So in very different ways, the work of the Forest Service is very important to the state of Maryland, which is why I'm extremely concerned that these accounts that I'm referencing were zeroed out in the President's budget. I can tell you I'll be working with my colleagues on a bipartisan basis to make sure that we preserve and support these efforts. But I understand the budget that you've submitted, but I just want to ask you if you will commit to working with me and my colleagues in the state of Maryland to make sure that the Forest Service remains an important partner in our efforts.
Senator, yes, sir. I think I want to point out, too, I think there's some confusion on the Wood Innovation Grants. That's a very popular program, and that will continue in this budget. That money would transfer to basically Department of Interior under the component that we transfer the fuels program of. There, it's about $175 million, so about $30 million of that is the Wood Innovation Grant funds. So that program would continue on. It would just be administered through the Department of Interior, and we would coordinate with them to administer that program. So at the University of Maryland, which is a land-grant university, and they do a lot of great work there, yes, sir, and that's something that would continue under this budget.
I will take a look at that. I also do just want to express my concerns, and I know Senator Heinrich and maybe others raised the issue about the Forest and Rangeland Research Account funding. And I understand you mentioned that a lot of that work could be done at universities like University of Maryland. As you know, a lot of the programs at University of Maryland, when I referenced, was actually funded through the Forest Service. So if you cut out that account, they're not really in a position to do it, especially when, as I'm sure you're aware, universities are seeing their budgets cut, and they're actually, this administration is blocking a lot of research to our our colleges and universities around the country. Thank you, Madam Chair. And thank you, but I look forward to working with you.
Thank you, Senator Van Hollen. So, Chief, I mentioned in my opening comments the concerns about the shift of wildfire management operations by proposing to merge the BLM and Forest Service operations into this U.S. Wildland Fire Service based over in the Department of Interior. And again, I want to understand more about this. I do think it makes sense to be looking for efficiencies. How we battle our wildfires, how we deal with them in this country is exceptionally important to all of us. And so as we're learning more, it's important for us, from the appropriations perspective, to understand how we can best make this thing work, because I don't want to be building an airplane literally and doing this reorganization when, to Senator Merkley's point, you've got horrible wildfires going across our country, and they don't care whether or not we're ready. So just a little, almost generically, in terms of the goals of the consolidation, I'm assuming this is about greater efficiencies. This is helping to be better stewards of our taxpayer dollars. But how do these goals really bolster the ability of our country to respond to the fires? And I want to ask particularly about the National Interagency Fire Center. You're obviously very familiar with it. It's been beneficial to interagency coordination for wildland fire. How is this consolidation going to impact that center that's based there in Boise? Are we going to need to detail additional people there? Can you just speak to more granular level on what this proposal really will do?
Senator, thank you for the question. So the intent of this consolidation really is to improve efficiencies, as you alluded to. It's improve communication and coordination, even how we do training. Even though we have interagency training standards, not all of the agencies train to the same degree and the same requirements to move up through the system. So the intent really is to standardize things across the board and have a unified firefighting force that would do both initial attack and extended attack on these programs. The budget also proposes to move the fuels programs. There's been a lot of discussion here about mitigation of wildfire and the fuels work that needs to be done. That would also move as well in this process. So currently, the fuels program is administered by the firefighting workforce that we have. So those folks would all move to this new agency. This agency would both do the fuels work as well as the firefighting work on initial attack and extended attack. We don't have the details all worked out yet. We're not talking about this summer. We're talking about in the future, in the next year. But this is something that we're committed to working through with Department of Interior to work through this. The other piece to keep in mind right now is you talked about NIFC. So NIFC has a representative from the Forest Service. There's a representative that's already there in Boise, so we don't need to move people there. We already have a representation there. But also you have 4 different bureaus within Department of Interior that are there. You also have the Association of State Foresters has a representative that represents the state interests. So the intent is to really consolidate that so they're working under the same administrative structure so that there's just greater coordination and communication as we administer the firefighting program.
So when you've got, I'm trying to understand kind of what's left with the Forest Service. If you move this out, and then when you have management decisions, say for instance with wildfire thinning, some of the resiliency activities, those stay within National Forest Service, right?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So would the Wildland Fire Service have any responsibility for making decisions in that area? And if so, what happens if you've got a disagreement over a proposed action? How do you mediate or manage this? Or maybe you don't have a conflict because it's clear lines. Or is that something that still has yet to be thought out?
So, Senator, it's what we do with the states today. We have agreements with the states. We have master agreements. We also have agreements with other local government cooperators. And in those agreements, you lay out expectations in terms of how we're going to pay for fires, how we're going to communicate on fires. So ideally, what you'd have is the Forest Service would have some type of master agreement with this entity that would create those clarity of expectations so that when the fire season came, you could anticipate that. And if there are issues that come up, which there are issues that come up every year,
Right.
you would work towards fixing those over the next, the years in the future. So we would do after-action reviews and those things to identify any issues that were not fully worked out in a particular year. And we do that every year. We review the fire season and identify what concerns or issues that we might have and work through that.
But I guess I'm thinking about it, sorry, you've got the response, you've got that end of it. But if you're looking at an area where you know you need to go in and do thinning, you want to go in and do some controlled burns within our national forests. That's not necessarily on the wildland fire side. That's kind of the management side. And I'm trying to understand what is left of the Forest Service after we move this out. What are you managing? To me, when I'm thinking about management of a forest, I am thinking about what it means to be able to reduce the threat from invasive species and disease, to reduce the threat by doing some thinning, because that's not kind of like your fire management plan for the season. How do you divide that up?
So, Senator, I think there's two questions there. One is what's left of the Forest Service?
Right.
So we would have still timber.
Right.
We would have recreation. We would have mining. We'd have grazing, all those.
But in
small
order to
pieces.
have healthy timber,
That's right.
you need to talk about thinning. You need to talk about invasive species and disease.
Right, and we do that today. You think about it, we have good neighbor agreements with the states.
Right.
So it's not uncommon that a state will come in and do timber sale administration on Forest Service lands. So imagine a similar type of concept where we're working with this entity that has money for fuels, which they could do prescribed fires, they could do mechanical treatments, but they would be working for the Forest Service. To your point, the Forest Service would still be the one making those decisions, but we would be leveraging those resources in interior to get that work done on the National Forest System. That's how I would envision that would work. It would have to be a coordinated
I always
discussion.
worry, though, when we're leveraging resources in another department and you have the potential for conflict. I'm well over my time, but you can tell I'm very interested in understanding more. I get what you're saying, that you're still working through some of these details, but know that we want to be part of these discussions in fully understanding the direction. Let me turn to Senator Merkley.
Thank you very much. And I'm going to ask the team to put the chart back up. One line in this is forest health management, which you told me a few minutes ago that, yes, you're going to be distributing those grants to states. I'm glad to hear that. But also, the chart shows that you're planning to zero out the program in FY26. Assuming this is what you're proposing, we'll see what Congress does. But in that regard to forest health management, I must say that we have challenges like the sudden oak death, which there is a variety of that could threaten the Douglas fir trees. Are you familiar with that particular disease?
I'm not, sir, no.
Well, I know that the Douglas trees also continue on into parts of Idaho and parts of Montana. So, but huge concentration in Oregon. That's why we have programs like forest health management, is to detect risks to our forests, to do the research, and to deploy the resources to try to take on those challenges. Why would you propose zeroing that out?
Senator, I think, again, part of this whole budget is to try to figure out what can we afford to maintain, and what makes sense to either have another entity do it. And for instance, on the forest health discussion, a lot of states have their own forest health programs above and beyond funding that comes from the federal government. And I know the industry does a lot of their own forest health monitoring as well. So if there's an opportunity for others to step into that space, I think that's what we would try to coordinate with that on.
Do you have any studies that have shown that work being done in other venues is sufficient to address the risk to our massive federal forests?
Senator, I'm aware there's a lot of private companies that do this work, in the United States and elsewhere that they use satellite technology to identify forest health issues. So outside of what the Forest Service does or funds, I can tell you there's a lot of work going on in the private sector that could facilitate some of this being done.
So let me just note that what I am hearing is that there is a lot of key work done in this line, very relevant to our federal forests that cannot be obtained from other sources. I think we need to take a very close look at that, but if you have any studies which show that work that is being replicated elsewhere, we'd certainly be interested in seeing it. I want to turn to the next line, which is state fire capacity grants, and the one after it, volunteer fire capacity. And these are also being, you've said you're going to distribute these funds this year, great, but these funds, the first one, the state fire capacity grants, goes to the state level and helps them with the programs they have. Some of those programs are going to be shut down if they don't have the grants to continue them. The second one, the volunteer fire capacity, this is very much about small rural fire stations. And when we have lightning storms, we have the possibility of 100 fires being lit at once. And getting our rural teams out fast, and they're normally volunteer teams, to put those out before they become a larger fire, particularly a fire that might be whipped up by the wind and grow very rapidly, is extremely important. So in what world does it make sense to devastate the ability of rural fire stations to tackle fires early?
Senator, so I think in terms of the strategy you're talking about is a relevant strategy. And Oregon has actually been a leader in rangeland fire protection associations. As you're fully aware, Eastern Oregon, they use that model to put out a lot of wildfires. And a lot of that funding, in many cases, is provided by other entities, states, and even like in Idaho, we have rangeland fire protection associations. Some of those costs are borne by the lessees and permittees themselves that do that work. So what we're trying to suggest in this budget is that there needs to be a shift in how these programs are funded in the future. And there's going to be a shift, again, in the budget to put greater reliance on the states and local government to cover those costs on their own without that direct federal support.
Well, I think I hear in that a lot of, we hope somebody else will do this work when we quit doing it because it's very important work. I think you're well familiar with the state budgets in Idaho and Montana, and I think your wish that somehow they're going to come up with funds to do things is unrealistic in the context of many other challenges those state governments are facing. So there's been a federal-local partnership, and certainly it's very relevant because the local areas help us fight the fires on federal forest land. And I appreciate the rangeland associations you're speaking to, but not all of our forests are range lands. Many of them depend on crews in highly forested areas that are local fire stations. And those crews are actually having more and more difficulty recruiting volunteers because many of those volunteers are essentially, to put it bluntly, getting old. And we're having a much harder time recruiting younger folks. It's a tougher economy, often both parents working, so on and so forth. So I think it may actually be an area that's going to need more support rather than less. I do have more questions, but I know my time is up, so I'll be submitting them for the record. But these are very important issues for us to wrestle with as a committee. And let's turn to my colleague.
Thank you, Mr. Ranking Member. Chief, glad you'll be in North Dakota in August to meet with some of our grazers. Very important on the national grasslands. And that the Forest Service is in the process of updating the Little Missouri National Grasslands Travel Management Plan that'll affect in North Dakota, Billings County, Golden Valley County, Slope County, McKenzie County. So we appreciate that work and look forward to working with you closely on it. Will you commit to not only consult with the state of North Dakota, but specifically our Ag Commissioner, Doug Goring, who's very knowledgeable, is a farmer himself, works and rancher, and works very closely with the grazers. Would you be sure to include him in your consultation?
Senator, yes, we will. You bet.
Thank you, Chief. And then also, are you committed to making sure that travel management plan works for our grazers and for our energy industry?
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Chief. Another area that actually the agency's been doing some really good work is in noxious weed control. The Deputy Chief, Chris French, has been outstanding. He's been out to North Dakota a number of times. He's been very responsive and has done an excellent job of helping us with the, with noxious weed control, which is something that has historically not been the case. And so I really want to commend him, the agency, and ask if you will continue that that commitment to that very important work.
Senator, if I look correctly, I think there's about 1.3 million that's going to be allocated for this year. That'll be forthcoming soon, and we'll continue that work. Yes, sir.
I really want to commend you on that. It's incredibly important for, it doesn't matter whether it's tourism or agriculture, you name it, for the health of the grasslands. And historically, we've had to just fight tooth and nail to get it, and you all have been good. And I just encourage you to continue that, and again, want to express my appreciation. Another issue is the prairie dogs, we understand in the park, they want prairie dogs, and folks like to have them around, all that kind of thing, but they still got to be managed so that they don't, completely encroach on the grazers' allotments. And I've been out to some of those, I guess you could call them pastures, but it looks like the moon. I mean, they dug, it's nothing but, there's not a blade of grass left. It's just a bunch of holes. It's dangerous that, if livestock goes over it. It's terrible. And the idea that we can allow these prairie dog towns to go and create that kind of situation, that actually is detrimental to the environment. And so are you committed to helping us control, or manage, I should say, the prairie dog population in a common sense way?
Yes, sir. I think I've looked, and it looks to me that over the last 5 years, we've allocated about $500,000 to help with some of the management of the prairie dogs. You're right; they can be devastating to the range productivity. It's a threat for livestock. Like you said, stepping in a hole or something. So it's something we definitely need to work with.
Yeah, and just reasonable buffers. I mean, just reasonable buffers between what's ranched and all that kind of thing, and then where you want the prairie dogs for tourism or whatever, right?
Yes, sir.
It's common sense. And then the last thing I'd bring up to you is access. The grazers got to have access on those section lines to get out, to move their cattle and do all those things. And so would you work with us on section lines and making sure that whether it's the energy industry, grazers, or even folks that are out there for tourism, all that kind of stuff, have reasonable access in the grasslands on the section lines?
Yes, sir.
All right. Again, thank you. Look forward to working with you. Appreciate it very much.
You bet.
Okay.
Thank you.
Take care. If there's no further testimony or questions at this point, questions can still be submitted for the record, and then we'd ask that, those are due by June 18th, and then we'd like a response, if possible, within 2 weeks, if that is something you could do.
Yes, sir.
All right. Thank you very much, and with that, then the hearing is completed. Thank you.